ceremonies tonight, and he has something he wants to read. Country Joe McDonald.
Some of you might know that I sang at the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. this Memorial Day. It was an honor for me to do that. I was very happy. Jan C. Scruggs, the man who built the wall, asked me if I would lay a wreath with Richard Nixon at the wall. And I said that yes, I would. Jan said that his feelings this year on the 10th anniversary was reconciliation and healing. I think that's very important. I didn't think that I agreed with Nixon, but I would lay a wreath with Nixon. Nixon refused to lay that wreath. He never showed up at the wall. I'd like to read something from Lewis Puller, Chesty Puller's son, who was the most highly decorated Marine that ever served in the Marine Corps. His son had both of his legs blown off in the Vietnam War, and I'm reading his autobiography at the moment. It's very good, very intelligent. I had the privilege of meeting him. And I'd like to read to you a little bit of, I would like to propose a toast to our children, and I would like to, through the words of Lewis Puller Jr., to kind of relive Dewey Canyon 3 and the perspective of someone living very close to Washington, D.C., a Marine, a Vietnam veteran, Lewis Puller Jr., as he watched the events unfold at Dewey Canyon 3 on the radio and on television. And for the sake of some of you who may not exactly remember, as a little bit of verbiage here, but I think you'll enjoy it. The third week in April of that year, more than 1,000 Vietnam veterans gathered in Washington to protest American involvement in the war. On Sunday, April 18, 1971, they began assembling in West Potomac Park, and their activities over the next 5 days reported extensively on national and local television and in newspapers throughout the country became known as Operation Dewey Canyon 3, after two similarly named earlier military operations in Vietnam. I was not a part of the anti-war movement, and indeed thought that many of the motives of its leaders were self-serving and destructive to the country. But as the week wore on and I watched my former comrades give vent to their feelings and frustrations, I was almost persuaded to go to Washington and join them. In the first course of the week, they conducted a ceremony for the war dead near the Tomb of the Unknowns in Arlington Cemetery, established a campsite on the Mall, demonstrated at the Pentagon and at the Supreme Court, and staged a candlelight march around the White House. Throughout the week, they lobbied on Capitol Hill for an end to the war. One articulate young combat veteran named John Kerry delivered a moving address before a special session of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that, for me, summed up the sense of betrayal and the disillusionment I felt toward the administration and the leadership that had directed the course of the war from the safety of its Washington power base. On Friday, April 23rd, 1971, in the culmination of the events of the week, the protesting veterans were scheduled to march to the steps of the Capitol and discard their medals in a symbolic gesture of their feeling of having been discarded themselves by the nation. These were many of my brothers, not starry-eyed intellectuals or malcontents dedicated to the overthrow of our form of government, but to soldiers and Marines, many of whom had paid for their perspectives with shattered lives and shattered limbs. They were now saying that their sacrifices had been meaningless, that my sacrifice had been meaningless, and that the precious blood spilled by our dead and maimed fellow veterans had been meaningless. For years I had been hearing similar rhetoric from anti-war spokesmen whose ideology was foreign to me, but I was now hearing it from those young men whose kinship with me had been forged in the bloody crucible of Vietnam, and its impact, like a fog lifting from a shrouded landscape, stripped me of my remaining self-delusions. On Thursday night, before the climactic last day's events in Washington took place, I took my medals from our bedroom closet and debated whether I should drive to Washington to throw them away. As I sat silently in the dimly lit closet, feeling the weight of the bronze and silver in my hand, and studying the red, white, and blue stripes of my silver star and the majestic cameos of George Washington on my purple hearts, I knew that I could never part with them, that they had cost me too dearly, and though I now saw clearly that the war in which they had been earned was a wasted cause, the medals still represented the dignity and the caliber of my service and those of whom I had served. I could no more discard them than I could repudiate my country, my Marine Corps, or my fellow veterans. As I put them away, I was very sad and very tired, but grateful nonetheless that my children were asleep in their beds in America rather than anywhere else in the world. A toast to our children.